Imagine a building looming like a giant stone tomb against the skyline of New York City in July 8887. Now, imagine packing 400 souls inside it. The air inside is not meant for breathing. It is a thick, stagnant soup of cooking grease, coal smoke, and the unwashed reality of 12 families sharing a single rusted cold water tap on each landing. The walls are so thin that at 3 in the morning, you don't just hear your neighbour's cough, you feel it vibrate through your own mattress. You try to open a window, but there is no relief. Outside there is only a narrow air shaft, a cruel architectural joke of the era, that collects the rot of a dozen kitchens and pushes it back into your room like a furnace. The temperature inside stays at 92 degrees, even at midnight. It is a suffocating pressurized existence where the city's ambition to build upward has only succeeded in burying its poorest residents alive in brick and mortar. But there is a secret, a desperate geography to these buildings. When the heat becomes a physical weight that threatens to crush the breath out of every child and every weary worker, there is only one place left to go. You don't go down in the stinking alleys, you go up. You climb the creaking, narrow stairs, past the doors that offer no privacy, past the hallways where despair is a permanent tenant, until you push open the heavy tar-covered hatch. You emerge on the roof. It is not a garden, it is not a paradise, and it is certainly not a place of romance. It is a barren, flat landscape of black, sticky tar that burns the soles of your feet. But to the thousands of immigrants gasping for air on the Lower East Side, this rooftop is the only room in the entire city where you can actually stay alive. It is a communal raft in a sea of misery. Here, the city's noise, the clatter of horse-drawn carriages on cobblestones, the shouting from the streets, the relentless rhythm of the factories seems to lose its edge, replaced by a collective heavy silence of people waiting for a breeze that rarely arrives. Tonight, you are going to climb those stairs with me. We are not looking at the skyscrapers that define the history books. We are looking at the roofs that define survival. We are going to step in the bruised purple light, an 887 summer night, where the line between heaven and the hell of the tenements is just one more flight of stairs. The channel Sleepy History with Benedict is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. To understand why the roof became a sanctuary, you first have to understand the trap you left behind. In 887, the New York tenement was not merely a house. It was a feat of cold industrial mathematics. Architects and landlords competed not for beauty, but for capacity. They operated on the principle that if a human body occupied only a few square feet, then a room only needed to be a few square feet larger. The design of the era, the notorious Dumble tenement, so named for its pinched middle, was hailed as a reform. It was legally mandated to provide light and air to the interior rooms. The solution? A narrow vertical shaft, barely 2.5 feet wide, carved in the centre of the building. On paper, it was a lung for the structure. In reality, it was a chimney for misery. When you stand in your kitchen on the 2nd floor, that air shaft is your only link to the outside world. But because the building is packed with hundreds of people, that shaft does not bring in fresh air. It is a vertical repository for everything the building rejects. It catches the steam from a dozen boiling pots of cabbage water. It traps the heavy, humid air that rises from the overflowing privies in the rear yard. It channels the dust, the soot, and the trapped heat of the day downward, then swirls it back into your window. In the height of July, when the sun beats down on the brick walls, these buildings turn into heat sinks. The bricks absorb the solar energy all day long and refuse to release it at night. The walls stay warm to the touch until dawn. You aren't just living in a room, you are living inside a kiln. This is why, as the sun dips below the horizon and the city starts to glow with the flickering orange of gaslights, you don't stay in your room. To stay is to suffocate. You watch your mother press a damp cloth to your younger sister's forehead, watching the fever and the heat drain the colour from her face. You look at the walls, peeling with damp, and you realise they offer no shelter from the atmosphere. You turn to the door, move out into the hallway, where the air is thick with the scent of damp wool and exhaustion, and you look up. There is one more flight of stairs. It is steep, dark, and leads to a heavy wooden door that opens to the sky. You aren't going up because you want to see the view. You are going up because the earth is failing you, and for the next few hours you are willing to trade the risk of a dangerous rooftop for the absolute certainty of suffocation in the dark below. Pushing open the heavy hatch door, the first thing that hits you is not the relief of cool air, but the sudden, overwhelming expansion of sound. Down in the tenement, the noise of the city is muffled by walls and floors. Up here, under the open, bruised purple sky of 8887, the sound of New York rushes in from every direction. It is the roar of a city that never stops to breathe. The roof itself is a surreal landscape of survival. During the day, the tar surface absorbs the unrelenting sun, becoming a sticky, viscous trap. Even in the dead of night, the material retains a residual heat that seeps through your thin, sweat-drenched blanket. This is the rooftop room, and it is claimed by hundreds of people. You have to weave your way through a maze of obstacles. Laundry lines sag under the weight of wet shirts and linens that won't dry in the humid air. Chimney stacks vent thick. Acrid coal smoke directly in the faces of those trying to sleep nearby, and loose boards, warped by years of shifting weather, threaten to trip you in the dark. There are no garden chairs here. There are no private balconies. If you are lucky, you have secured a small patch of space near the water tower or behind a chimney, far enough from the fire's escape so that you aren't trampled by neighbours coming up late. Every square inch of the roof is spoken for. A family of 5 might be huddled on a thin quilt, the father staring blankly at the sky while the mother keeps a nervous eye on her children, terrified they might stumble too close to the unguarded ledge. This is a space of radical proximity. You are breathing the same air as the stranger next to you. You are close enough to smell the stale tobacco on a man's breath as he leans against the parapet, watching the flickering gaslights of the Lower East Side below. You hear the hushed, frantic whispers of neighbours trading news of factory layoffs or asking about who has the fever this week. It is a place where you cannot be alone, yet everyone is profoundly isolated in their own struggle. Danger is everywhere. The edges of the roof are precarious, protected only by low, crumbling parapets. In the distance, you see the silhouettes of other roofs, connected by a network of clotheslines and shaky planks where older children occasionally play a dangerous game of bridge between buildings. You realise that this roof is not an isolated island. It is part of a dark, sprawling, interconnected city of tar and brick that stretches across the horizon. You settle down on your blanket, pulling your knees to your chest, and for a moment the heat seems to recede. Just enough for you to realise that you are not just a tenant in a building, you are a survivor of the city. Lying on your back, the sky above New York feels different than the one you left behind in the village. Back home, the stars were a map, a steady guide. Here, the sky is a bruised purple, washed out by the relentless glow of the city's gas lamps and the coal, burning furnaces that never sleep. You watch the smoke drift upward, a dark ribbon vanishing into the void, and you wonder if the people looking at the stars from the other side of the world see the same heavens, or if the smoke of New York has clouded the view for everyone. The silence here is not empty, it is filled with the low-frequency thrum of human existence. You hear the rhythmic guttural Yiddish coming from the family to your left, the melodic, sharp cadence of Polish to your right, and the occasional jarring rattle of an elevated train passing several blocks away. Every few minutes the building beneath you trembles, a phantom vibration that runs from the foundation to the rooftop. It is as if the city itself is rests, unable to find comfort, just like you. In these quiet hours, you start to construct a version of home that doesn't exist anymore. You recall the smell of damp earth after a rain, a scent that never visits Orchard Street. Here, the air is never clean. It is always seasoned with the metallic taste of the factories, the sour tang of the harbour, and the pervasive, cloying smell of human density. You try to conjure a memory of true coolness, the way the wind felt against your neck in a field, not against a brick wall. But the memory is fading, replaced by the immediate tactile reality of the tar beneath your back and the heat that still radiates from the building's core. Yet, there is a strange shared peace in this collective suffering. You are all part of a grand, desperate experiment, thousands of immigrants drawn to this island by promises of gold and liberty, now finding themselves huddled together on top of one another just to survive the summer night. You realize that you aren't the only one waiting for a breeze. There are mothers praying for their sick children, men worrying about the next day's piecework pay, and teenagers staring at the horizon, trying to imagine a future that doesn't involve the stifling air of a tenement floor. You are all borrowing the air. It is the only thing in this city that the landlord hasn't found a way to charge rent for yet. As you close your eyes, the boundaries of your individual lives seem to blur. You are no longer just a worker in a cigar factory or a daughter waiting for a better tomorrow. You are hyped in the collective pulse of the Lower East Side. The roof is a great equalizer, stripping away the roles you play in the light of day, leaving only the raw biological need for a moment of quiet under the vast, uncaring sky. All stories on this channel, Sleepy History with Benedict, are fictional, thoughtfully crafted around historical themes and inspired by real events, figures, and periods, reimagined for engaging storytelling. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or document cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental. The night is never truly still. Just when you begin to drift, the air shifts. A sudden, sharp scent of charred wood or a stray spark from a chimney can send a ripple of anxiety through the scattered crowd on the roof. In the 880s, fire was the single greatest nightmare of the tenement dweller. The buildings were death traps, packed with wood, paper, and grease, connected by nothing more than wooden stairwells and hope. You look toward the edge of the roof and see the gaps between the buildings. These are not gaps in space, but gaps in safety. They are the informal passages, places where neighbours have rigged planks or simply learned to leap the short distance between parapets. It's an unauthorised, dangerous geography, but at night these routes become a lifeline. If a fire broke out on the second floor, you wouldn't go down into the black, smoke-filled stairwell. You would run across the roof, jumping from one building to the next, until you reached a roof with an iron fire escape. You see a group of men gathered near a chimney, whispering. They aren't just talking. They are watching the horizon, tracking the glow of the city. One of them smokes a pipe, the orange ember a tiny, lonely star in the darkness. You realize that your survival here is contingent on the behavior of strangers. If the building next door burns, yours likely will too. This interdependence is both a comfort and a crushing weight. You find yourself holding your breath whenever fire engine's bell rings in the distance, clanging against the humid night air. You pray that the sound is moving away from your block. It's in these moments of uncertainty that you understand the true nature of this life. You are constantly negotiating with catastrophe. If you find yourself drawn into the quiet intensity of these stories, please consider subscribing to the channel. By hitting the like button and sharing your thoughts in the comments, you help us keep these forgotten windows into history open for others who, like you, seek to understand the resilience of those who came before us. Your support allows us to continue crafting these nocturnal journeys into the past. For now the sirens fade, the night holds its breath, and once again the heavy, humid heat settles back down, turning the roof into a shared resting place for the weary, waiting for a dawn that feels like it's 1,000 years away. The first light of dawn is not the golden, poetic sun you imagine. In the Lower East Side, it is a bruise-coloured grey, filtering through the industrial haze that never truly clears. At 4:05 a.m, the roof begins to wake. The collective slumber of hundreds is broken by the sharp and metallic tolling of church bells, the frantic rhythmic clatter of the first carts rolling over the cobblestones below. You roll your blanket, the same thin damp quilt that is your only possession of comfort, and carry it back down the dark spiralling stairs. As you descend, the air changes. It loses the faint, desperate sweetness of the night air and thickens with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale cabbage, and the damp rot of the air shaft. By the time you reach the second floor, you are already mentally preparing for the shift. You are a cigar roller. In the 8880s, this is not a trade. It is a marathon of the fingers. You are paid by the piece, not by the hour. Every cigar you finish is a penny. Every cigar you ruin is a deduction. When you arrive at the factory, a room that feels even smaller than your tenement apartment, the air is already heavy with tobacco dust. You sit at your wooden bench, your thumb pad hardened into permanent callus from pressing the wrapper leaves into moulds. Your fingers move with a memory of their own. You have learned the texture of the leaf in the dark. You know when the tobacco is too dry and will crack, or when it is too damp and will rot. For the next 12 hours, the world shrinks to the size of your lap. There is no roof here. There is only the foreman's voice, the unrelenting pace of the pile of leaves, and the gnawing fear that today your hands might not be fast enough to earn the rent. You think back to the few hours on the roof. You remember the way the breeze felt against your face, a fleeting grace that feels like a dream now, distorted by the bright, harsh glare of the factory floor. You realize that your life is divided into two distinct halves, the hours you borrow from the city and the hours you sell to the factory. The roof was the only place where you were not just a unit of production, you were simply a human being breathing. And as the foreman shouts for more speed, you hold on to that memory of the night air, guard it like a secret, waiting for the sun to set so you can climb back up to the sky. While the factory floor is a place of silence and rigid production, the rooftop is the exact opposite. It is a vibrant, chaotic, and desperately human town square suspended above the soot of the Lower East Side. As the sun sets and the heat of the day begins its agonizingly slow retreat, the rooftop transforms. The stiff formality of the streets appears, and a unique, fragile culture takes its place. Here, the boundaries between the Polish, the Irish, the Italian, and the Jewish immigrants begin to blur. It is a landscape of shared language, not necessarily words, but the universal grammar of struggle. You see a group of older women, their hands weathered by years of scrub boarding, sitting in a circle near a ventilation duct. They are peeling potatoes for the next day. Their voices a low, rhythmic hum. They speak in their native tongues, yet they understand one another perfectly. One woman tells of a letter received from her village back in the old country, a tale of a harvest that failed, or a relative who has finally saved enough for the steamship ticket to New York. The listener nods, a look of profound, shared grief crossing her face, though they come from different ends of the continent. These rooftop conversations are the height of the immigrant experience. There is no privacy, and because of that, there is no isolation. If a family is struggling with a sick child, the news travels across the tarred surface within minutes. You watch as a neighbour offers a small, precious piece of fruit or a bit of advice on how to brew a tea that might break a fever. It is a primitive, yet powerful form of social welfare, built entirely on the necessity of proximity. In the corner, away from the watchful eyes of the matriarchs, the teenagers gather. For them, the roof is the only place where they are not defined by their jobs or their parents' expectations. They lean against the parapets, watching the city below, dreaming of lives that don't involve 12-hour shifts. They speak in a strange, evolving dialect, a mixture of their native mother tongue and the sharp, fast-paced English they pick up on the streets. They tell jokes, they argue over the latest neighbourhood gossip, and sometimes they just sit in a shared silence, looking out at the glittering, distant lights of the more prosperous sticks of New York. To them, the roof is the edge of the world. It is the only place they can stand without being pushed. This is the hidden history of New York, not the grand monuments, but the thousands of small, intimate networks that were woven together in the dark on these tar-covered islands in the sky. You learn here that everyone has a story, a reason they left, a fear they carry, and a hope they are protecting. You realize that you aren't just one person trying to survive. You are part of a massive living organism of human resilience. The roof is where the city's harsh, unyielding exterior is finally allowed to crack open, revealing the vulnerability and the hope hidden within. You listen to the hum of voices, the occasional burst of laughter, and the distant, constant rattle of the city, and you feel for the first time that you are not entirely alone. You will learn the language of the city, a language spoken in whispers on rooftops, where the air is thin, but the spirit is vast. By 2 a.m, the frantic energy of the evening has dissolved into heavy, stagnant silence. The rooftop is no longer a town square. It has become a sanctuary for restless. If you're awake at this hour, you are part an exclusive, silent brotherhood of the sleepless. You lie on your back, your shirt sticking to your skin, staring at the sky. Above you, the bruised purple hue of the night sky seems to press down, not with malice, but with a crushing, infinite weight. This is when the city reveals its true character to those who watch from above. The gas lamps in the streets below flicker like dying embers. You can see the long, deep canyons of the tenements, and for a moment the architectural cruelty of the day feels softened by the shadows. The buildings are no longer just dumbbell tenements or fire traps. They are dark, sleeping giants. Each one holds hundreds of lives, each one harbouring its own private set of dreams, despairs and secrets. You look across the rooftops and see the silhouettes of others, a man sitting on a chimney stack, smoking. A woman lean against a parapet, her eyes fixed on the horizon, a child curling in the side of a water tower. You realize that you are all connected by this singular, shared experience of surviving the impossible. There is a strange, hypnotic quality to this, isn't there? The way history isn't just about dates and battles, but about these quiet, forgotten moments of breathing. The way we search for a sliver of coolness in a night that fuses to break. It's in these moments that the past feels reachable. We aren't just observing history, we are sitting beside it, waiting for the wind. If you have been feeling the weight of this story, the quiet resilience of those who climb these stairs, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your interaction helps this story ripple outward, reaching others who find solace in the depth of historical storytelling. If you have ever felt the need to climb above the noise of your own world, to find a moment of peace, share a memory or a thought in the comments below. We read every word, and your perspective adds a new layer to this shared experience. The city continues its slow. You hear a distant train whistles, a haunting, lonely sound that seems to echo the collective loneliness of the Lower East Side. You are learned that to live here is to be constantly in motion, even when you are lying perfect still on a roof. You are learning the geography of endurance. And as you wait for the elusive breeze, you begin to understand that even the most oppressive heat eventually gives way. You are a part of a long unbroken lineage of people who looked up at this same bruised sky and held on, waiting for the air to turn, waiting for the morning to bring a new, slightly different version of the world. While the adults are weighed down by the gravity of survival, calculating pennies, worry about sickness, or mourning the loss of a life left behind, the children of the Lower East Side possess a different kind of authority. To them, the roof is not a place of refuge, it is a kingdom. While their parents are trapped in the stifling airless rooms below, children have mastered the geography of the heights. They know the roof better than they know their own names. For a child like Zofia, 9 years old and already hardened by the city's pace, the rooftops are a series of interconnected islands. She and her friends have discovered that the roof of 97 Orchard Street isn't a dead end. By scaling a low, crumbling parapet and leaping across the narrow gap to the neighbouring building, they can travel for blocks with ever setting foot on the street. These are the secret routes laundry, strewn bridges that span the canyons of the city. They play tag between chimneys that belch smoke like lazy dragons. They use the discarded wooden crates as forts and the clotheslines as secret communication systems, tugging on the wires to signal friends on distant roofs. To an adult, look at these gaps, you see only death, a plummet in the cobblestone abyss below. To a child, it is a game of skill, a rhythmic jump that requires nothing more than timing and the absolute fearless belief that they won't fall. This play is in its own way a form of protest. In a city that is designed to squeeze them into tiny dark corners, the children claim the sky. They don't care about the soot that stains their hands or the tar that ruins their shoes. They are creating a world where they have agency. When they jump, they are momentarily weightless, suspended between the tenements and the stars. It is the only time in their lives that they are not immigrant children or factory labour. They are simply children, wild and free. But there is a poignancy to their laughter. You watch them from your blanket, feeling a twinge of envy mixed with terror. You know the dangers. You've seen the boards that shift underfoot, the rusty nails waiting to tear skin, and the sheer drops that guard the edges of their playground. You want to shout at them to be careful, but the words die in your throat. You realize that for these children the danger on the roof is no more terrifying than the danger in the rooms below. The tenement is a slow death, a stifling of the lungs and the spirit, while the roof is an exhilarating, dangerous, and beautiful life. They are choosing the risk of the air over the certainty of the dark, and in that choice, they are the most liberated people in all of New York City. They are the cartographers of the heights, mapping out a future that their parents can only dream of, one daring, terrifying leap at a time. Time on the roof behaves differently than it does in the world below. Down there, time is measured in factory whistles, in the clanging of the elevator trains, and in the relentless ticking of the piece rate clock. But up here, beneath the vast bruised sky of the Lower East Side, time expands. It slows down to the pace of a cooling breeze or the sluggish drift of a cloud. You begin to realize that summer in the 8880s is not just a season. It is an endurance test, a recurring trial of the spirit. You learn to read the passage of time not by the sun, but by the changing quality of the heat. There is the oppressive, humid heat of the noonday sun, which drives everyone into the shade of the chimney stacks. There is the thick, heavy heat of the afternoon, which feels like a physical weight pressing against your lungs. And then there is the precious, fragile late-night heat, the moment when the bricks have finally begun to exhale the solar energy they collected all day, and the air feels almost breathable. You watch the season turn, not in the changing colours of leaves, but in the subtle shift of the neighbourhood's anxiety. As August wanes, the air doesn't necessarily get cooler, but it gets thinner. You see the signs in the way people stop arguing and start simply existing, united by a silent collective exhaustion. You are learned that the city is not a static place. It is a creature that changes its temperament, and you are a part of its metabolism. Before we drift further into the silence of these nights, I want to invite you one last time to leave your mark on this story. If you have felt the pulse of these 100-year-old nights, if you appreciate the effort it takes to keep these voices from fading into total obscurity, please leave a comment with your thoughts on what home means to you. Does it mean a place of physical comfort, or is it a space we create for ourselves, like these rooftops, in the midst of our own personal storms? Your words help turn this channel into living, breathing community. Do not forget to subscribe if you wish to continue this journey through the hidden corners of history with us. As you reflect on your own home, remember that the people on this roof were not so different from us. They were searching for the same things, a bit of air, a bit of peace, and the feeling that they were not entirely alone in their struggles. They were the architects of their own survival, building a life out of the scraps left behind by a city that was too busy growing to notice them. They were, in their own quiet way, the ones who kept the city's heart beating through the sweltering heat of the 8880s. And as you prepare to move into the final chapters of this story, carry with you the weight of their resilience. Is a reminder that no matter how stifling the heat or how dark the night, there is always a way up, there is always a roof, and there is always a sky. If you were to walk on that same roof today, if you could peel back the layers of time, the modern HVAC units, the security fences, and the urban decay, you would find more than just tar and brick. You would find the echoes of 1,000,000 stories that were never written down. You would find the phantom pressure of thousands of souls that paced these few hundred square feet, walking off the anxiety of a 12-hour shift, walking off the grief of losing a child to the summer complaint, walking off the sheer, crushing weight of being an immigrant in a city that treated you as a resource rather than a soul. We often think of history as something grand, the rise of skyscrapers, the construction of the bridges, the industrial expansion that made New York the capital of the world. But the real history, the one that leaves a mark on the human heart, is found in these small, desperate acts of reclamation. Every time someone climbed those stairs, they were asserting their right to exist. They were saying, "I am here, and I need to breathe." That is a defiant act. It is a fundamental declaration of humanity that has echoed through the streets of New York for over a century. When you look at the old photographs from the 80s, you see the density of the Lower East Side, the black and white blur of tenement buildings huddled together like cattle. But you don't see the air. You don't see the way the families gathered on the rooftops, whispering their secrets in languages that were being lost to time. You don't see the way they looked at the moon, use it as a mirror to reflect the homes they had left behind. That is what I want you to carry with you, the invisible history of the night. Think of the resilience it took to wake up every morning in those dark, suffocating rooms, work until your hands bled. And then, instead of giving up, find the energy to climb the stairs one more time just to see the stars. They were the original architects of urban survival. They taught us that even in the most crowded, oppressive environments, there is a way to find a perspective that is entirely your own. They were the ones who kept the light on, not just in their windows, but in their spirits, during the darkest summers this city has ever known. As we look back at these lives, we're not just looking at a past that is dead and gone, we are looking at a mirror. The struggles of the 80s, the search for decent housing, the fight for breathable air, the desperate need for a sense of belonging, are the same struggles we face today. We all still, in our own way, trying to find our own rooftop. We all still looking for a moment of peace, a breath of air, and a place where we can simply stand, look at the horizon, and feel that we have survived the day. This content is inspired by and adapted from public domain works available through Project Gutenberg. The material has been transformed through original narration, editing, and storytelling to create a unique experience for educational and entertainment purposes. As the seasons cycle forward, the brutal heat of July eventually breaks, the first cool breezes of September begin to sweep down from the north, and the city's complexion changes. The frantic, desperate migration to rooftops slows, and the social life of the tenement begins to retreat once more behind the heavy brick, walled doors. But the roof does not forget. It carries the history of those sweltering summers in the very fibres of its being. Even today, if you look at the surviving tenements of the Lower East Side, you can see the architecture of that survival. You can see the remnants of the clothesline pulleys that once crisscrossed the sky like a spider web. You can see the charred patches on the parapets, where chimneys once vented their endless coal smoke. These are not just signs of decay, they are the architectural scars of a generation that had to fight for every breath they took. The buildings thems were transformed by the people who lived in them. The wear on the stairs, the slight indentations in the roof's surface, the way the fire escapes were repurposed into extensions of the living room, these are the fingerprints of human history etched into stone and iron. The dumbbell design, which once served as a literal trap for heat and disease, became a relic of a time when the city was still learning how to house its own people. As sanitation laws changed and the city began to regulate air shafts and occupancy, the function of the roof as a survival space slowly faded. But the legacy of that era remains in our understanding of what a city really is. A city is not just its skyline or its grand thoroughfares, it is the sum of the spaces in between, the places where people find their own solutions to systemic failures. When you walk past these buildings now, it is easy to see them as silent, historic artifacts. But if you listen closely to the creak of the floorboards or the way the wind whistles through the narrow alleys, you can almost hear the low, rhythmic hum of the 8880s. You can feel the ghost of that collective, desperate, and ultimately triumphant spirit. They were not just victims of their environment, they were the masters of it. They navigate a landscape that was never built with their comfort in mind, and they did it with a tenacity that would define their character of New York for the next century. The story of the rooftop is a reminder that resilience is not a grand singular event, it is a quiet daily practice. It is the simple, stubborn act of showing up, of looking for a breeze, and of holding on to the hope that tomorrow might be just a little bit cooler. As we look toward the future, we carry these lessons with us. We understand that our environment, our walls, our cities, our circumstances do not define us as much as how we choose to navigate them. And as long as there is a sky above, there is always the possibility of rising. Then it happens. A single distinct Tuesday morning in September, the air changes. It is a subtle shift at first, a crisp, biting clarity that slices through the lingering humidity. You wake up on your mattress, and for the first time in months, your shirt is not soaked through with sweat. You don't wake up gasping. You wake up with your lungs feeling light, as if the heavy, leaden atmosphere of the Lower East Side has finally been lifted. The impact of this change on the rooftop is instantaneous. The frantic energy that defined the summer nights evaporates. The atmosphere shifts from one of desperate collective survival to a quiet, contemplative peace. The people on the roof are no longer just waiting. They are resting. You see neighbours who spent July arguing over space, now sharing a blanket or trading quiet stories about the harvest back home. Stories that were too heavy to tell while everyone was struggling to catch a breath in the heat. The city below seems to change its tone as well. The constant, aggressive clatter of the streets feels less like an assault on your senses and more like the rhythmic height of a functioning world. The factories seem to operate with a bit less malice. The foreman's voice isn't quite as sharp. It is as if the entire city, having survived the brutal test of the summer, has been granted a collective reprieve. For you, this is the most dangerous part of the year, not because of the heat or the Z's, but because of the reflection. When you aren't fighting for your next breath, you have time to think. You think about the letters you haven't sent home, because you couldn't bear to admit how hard life here actually is. You think about the money you've saved, the coins hidden beneath the floorboards, and whether it will ever be enough to move your family out of the tenement. You realize that you have changed too. You are no longer the wide-eyed immigrant who stepped off the boat in March. You are someone who has learned how to live on the edge, someone who has made the rooftop a home when there was no other place to go. The roof is now a place of transition. You aren't just sleeping here to avoid the heat. You are coming here to watch the city move into autumn. You see the colours of the skyline shift, the way the light catches the brick in a softer, more forgiving way. You realise that you have survived. A new kind of trial, a new kind of challenge, but for now, in the golden, cooling light of September, you are alive. You have navigated the fire and the fever, the smell of coal smoke and the density of 400 lives stacked into 7 stories, and you are still standing. You are part of the bedrock of this city now, a silent witness to the endless, beautiful and punishing cycle of life in New York. Looking back at the past 3 months, the transition feels almost dreamlike. You recall that day in March when you first stepped onto the cobblestones of Orchard Street, the overwhelming noise, the aggressive pace, the feeling that you were a speck of dust in a whirlwind of industry. You were terrified of the stairs, of the landlord's knock, of the suffocating darkness of the air shaft. Now, those fears haven't vanished, but they have been domesticated. They have become the background noise of your daily life. You have become a cartographer of the mundane. You know exactly which stair on the 4th floor creaks under the weight of a heavy basket, and which corner of the factory room catch the best light in the late afternoon. You know the gossip, the unspoken rules of the tenement hallways, and the precise rhythm of the neighbours' lives. You have mapped the city not by its famous avenues or its grand architecture, but by the scent of baking bread in the morning and the damp, metallic smell of the harbour at night. Most importantly, you have mapped the sky. The rooftop, once a place of sheer survival, has become a place of sanctuary. It is where you go to recalibrate yourself, to remind yourself that there is a world beyond the piecework and the rent collectors. You have learned that the city is not just a collection of buildings. It is a collection of secrets, held in the quiet moments between the roar of the day. You have realized that to survive here is not just about physical endurance, it is about emotional navigation. You see the younger ones now, the new arrivals who look just as wide-eyed and lost as you once did. You watch them navigate the hallways with the same hesitant steps, and you feel a strange protective responsibility toward them. You don't need to speak their language to understand their fear. You know what they're looking for: a corner, a space, a sliver of air. You find yourself nodding to them in the stairwell, a silent acknowledgement that you are all in this together, weaving your threads into the complex, enduring tapestry of the Lower East Side. The city has changed you, but you have also changed the city. Every person who survives a summer on these rooftops adds a layer of resilience to the foundation of New York. You are no longer just a tenant. You are a survivor, a witness, and a participant in a grand, unrelenting, and beautiful struggle. The winter will come, with its biting cold and its own set of challenges. But you aren't afraid. You have already survived the heat. You have already climbed the heights. You have learned how to look at the world from the roof, and once you've seen the city from that perspective, suspended between the struggle below and the infinite sky above, you never truly look at it the same way again. You have found your place, right here, in the bruised purple glow of a city that never stops, and you are ready for whatever comes next. The transition of the seasons is not a conclusion, it is merely a turning of the page in the unwritten ledger of the city. As autumn settles over the Lower East Side, the desperate migration to the rooftops begins to ebb, but the architecture of that survival remains. These buildings, these stone and brick testaments to a frantic era, silent witnesses to the thousands of lives that once surged upward seeking the only air available to them. You stand at the edge of the parapet, looking out not just at the New York of 8887, but through it toward the layers of time that define this island. The history of the tenement is not a locked room, it is a persistent, whispering presence. Every time the wind whistles through the narrow gap of an old air shaft, or the sunset hits the weathered tar of a rooftop, you are reminded that the struggle of the immigrant, the worker, and the dreamer is not confined to a single decade. It is a fundamental friction that drives the city's constant evolution. Even as you prepare to descend the stairs once more, you are acutely aware that the story of these rooftops has no tidy resolution. The questions that haunted the people of the 8880s, the demand for dignity in housing, the fundamental right to clean air, the struggle to balance the crushing requirements of industry with the fragile needs of the human soul, are questions that echo into our present. The city continues to build, to grow, and to crowd its inhabitants into new forms of density. We are all, in a sense, still looking for our own rooftop, still reaching for a space where we can stand above the noise and find a moment of clarity. You watch the lights of the city flicker to life, a sprawling golden web that stretched toward the horizon, and you realize that you have become part of this ongoing narrative. You are not an observer of history, you are a continuation of it. The resilience you witnessed, the quiet strategies of survival, and the profound, shared humanity of those summer nights are threads woven in the very fabric of New York. The hatch door is heavy, and the stairs are steep, but you turn back to the building below with a different understanding. The tenement is not just a structure of failure, it is a repository of human potential, a place where, against all odds, life insisted on flourishing. As you reach the landing, the city continues its low, vibrating hum, a sound that is both a challenge and an invitation. The night is far from over, and the city holds its breath, waiting to see what the next generation of dreamers will do when the air grows thin and the walls begin to close in. You are left with the silence of the hallway and the knowledge that, somewhere, on another rooftop, the story is beginning all over again. If the tenement floor is a place where you keep your head down to avoid trouble, the rooftop is where you discover you aren't the only stranger in a strange land. In 8887, the Lower East Side is a fragment map of the old world. You have the Polish quarters, the Jewish enclaves, the Italian pockets, each clinging to the traditions, foods, and dialects of the lands they fled. But at night, on the tarred islands above, these borders don't hold the same weight. It is a form of rooftop babble. You might hear a woman humming a folk song from the Carpathian Mountains, while the man sitting 3 feet away, an Italian tailor, hums a melody from Naples. They don't share a language, but they share the melody of longing. There is a deep, unspoken political reality to this. These people are the disposable workforce of the Gilded Age, the cogs in the wheels of a city that prioritizes expansion over existence. Yet, in their night congregation, they are creating something the industrial architects never intended, a unified community of the displaced. You watch an older man, a shoemaker who has been in New York for 6 months, gesturing to a young woman, teaching her how to hold a damp cloth to her brow to cool the fever. They communicate through pantomime, through the universal signs of compassion. You begin to understand the politics of the era, the fierce debates in the newspapers about the immigrant problem or the tenement blight are abstractions that mean nothing up here. Here, the reality is granular. The reality is that if the person next to you doesn't eat, if their child doesn't recover, the entire structure of your collective survival is threatened. You also notice the subtle introduction of new words into their speech. A phrase in Polish by a sharp, American-born profanity. A greeting in Yiddish is answered with a shrug that is distinctly New York. This is the birthplace of a new identity. It isn't just that they are becoming Americans, they are becoming New Yorkers. They are learning to navigate a city that is too big, too loud, and too indifferent to care about their origins. The political implications of this are immense, though they are currently powerless, stuck in the dark rooms. Underpaid in the factories, they are learning the power of association. They are learning that they can endure more together than they can apart. This rooftop diplomacy is the foundation of the labour movements that will eventually rise from these streets. It is the beginning of the realization that there is strength in the density, that there is a collective voice hidden within the collective struggle. As you sit there, listening to the murmurs of a dozen different languages rising in the night air like smoke, you realize that you aren't just looking at a group of tired workers. You are witnessing the formation of a society, a raw, unpolished and resilient new entity, forged in the heat of a New York summer and held together by the quiet, defiant act of simply choosing to exist together under the stars. When the sun reaches its zenith, the rooftop is abandoned. The tar becomes too hot to touch, radiating a punishing heat that could blister bare feet. You retreat down the narrow, spiraling staircase, back in the belly of the tenement. The transition is jarring. One moment you are under the vast open sky, the next you are submerged in the subterranean gloom of a room that has not seen direct sunlight in years. These interior rooms are architectural anomalies. They are the dead spaces of the building, carved out to maximize density. Because they have no windows to the street, they borrow their light and their air from the narrow, dark air shaft. To live here is to live in a perpetual state of twilight. Even at noon, you must light a tallow candle to see the stitching on your work, or to find your way to the water basin. The air is never fresh. It is a stagnant mixture of yesterday's dinner, the damp rot of the walls, and the distant muffled sounds of 100 other families living exactly the same way. There is a profound psychological weight to these rooms. They are not designed for living, they are designed for packing. You find you're spending as little time as possible within these four walls. You leave before the light fails and return only when the heat of the day has driven the entire building out of its skin and toward the roof. You start to view these rooms not as a home but as a cage, a necessary temporary vessel that holds your body while the rest of you is somewhere else, dreaming of the next climb. The culture of the tenement is defined by this duality. Your home is a place of utility, a place to sleep and suffer through the heat, while your life, your community, your relief, your sense of self happens elsewhere. This separation breeds a strange kind of detachment. You become a master of making a home out of nothing. You hang a picture from the old country, a faded portrait of a grandpa who never knew what a tenement was, or a small pressed flower from a field you haven't walked in for years. These objects are tiny anchors, prevent you from drifting away in the sea of grey, damp brick. Yet there is a haunting beauty in the way people decorate these dark spaces. A bit of lace on a table, a carefully polished brass lamp, the way a mother keeps her children clean despite the coal dust that falls like snow from the air shafts. These are acts of war. Every bit of cleanliness, every touch of beauty, is a defiant strike against the environment that seeks to break them. You learn that in the 8880s, the battle for the immigrant is not just for bread, it is for the preservation of the human spirit in a place that treats you as a statistic. As you sit on your pallet, waiting for the evening bell to ring, you watch the dust motes dancing in the faint light of the shaft, and you recognize that even here in the dark you are part of an endurance that is as ancient as it is modern. There is a profound, almost violent disconnect between your life on the roof and the life of the city that thrives only a few miles away. Down on Fifth Avenue, the Gilded Age is in full, radiant bloom. There, the wealthy occupy mansions that are testaments to opulence, marble halls, velvet drapes, and chandeliers that burn brighter than the stars you see from your parapet. To those in power, the Lower East Side is a distant, troubled stain on the map of New York, a place to be managed by reformers or ignored by the fashionable. When the wealthy pass through the fringes of your neighborhood in their polished carriages, they look at the tenements and see only the masses. They see a faceless, homogeneous sea of poverty. They don't see the individual stories, the specific heartaches, or the quiet, nightly dignity of the rooftop congregations. To them you are part of the problem, to be solved by zoning laws or charity drives, not human beings carving out a life against the suffocating pressure of brick and heat. This invisibility is, in many ways, your greatest shield and your greatest burden. Because you are ignored by the city's architects of wealth, you are left to your own devices. No one is coming to sweep the chimneys, no one is coming to patch the leaky roofs, and no one is coming to provide a fan for the 92-degree nights. You are left to survive in the margins. But there is a secret power in this neglect. Because the authorities rarely look up, the roof becomes a space of semi-autonomy. It is a place where you can exist outside the direct gaze of the state, where you can speak your own languages and build your own informal social order. You see the disparity in the light itself. The gas lamps of the wealthy districts create a glow that seems to push away the shadows, while the light in your neighbourhood is always struggling, always flickering, always compromised by the soot that coats the globes. You realise that you are living in two worlds at once, the real world of struggle, piecework, and survival, and the phantom world of the New York dream that the newspapers and politicians talk about, a dream that, for now, seems designed specifically to exclude you. But the history books often forget that these two worlds are not separate. They are built upon one another. The wealth of the Gilded Age, the grand expansion of the city, and the infrastructure of the modern metropolis are all fueled by the labour of the very people who are currently huddled on these rooftops. Your exhaustion is the engine of their luxury. Your survival is the unspoken price of their growth. Standing on your roof, watching the distant bright lights of the city's heart, you don't feel jealous. You feel a cold, hard clarity. You are the foundation. You are the invisible force that keeps the city turning. And though the carriages on Fifth Avenue may never pass through Orchard Street, they are, in every mechanical and economic sense, powered by the hands that roll cigars on the floor below your feet. In the sweltering heat of August, the city's silence is often broken by a sound that every tenant on the Lower East Side fears. The low, rhythmic sobbing of a mother whose child has succumbed to the summer complaint. In the tenements of the 8880s, death is not a rare visitor, it is an intimate neighbour. The same heat that makes the rooms unbreathable also breeds the sicknesses that thrive in the air shafts and the shared water taps. When a life slip away in the dark, crowded rooms below, the roof becomes the only place for the survivors to process the weight of that absence. You see them come up, not for air this time, but for perspective. They sit near the parapets, their faces etched with a grief that is too large for the cramped hallways. They aren't looking for a breeze. They are looking for a way to reconcile their reality of their loss with the relentless, indifferent machinery of the city that continues to grind on regardless. There is a profound, solemn etiquette to how the community responds to these moments. You see a neighbour, perhaps someone who hasn't spoken a word to the grieving family in weeks, silently place a hand on their shoulder or offer a piece of bread, a small tangible gesture of acknowledgement. There are no grand funeral processions here, no quiet gardens to sit in. There is only the rooftop, where the sky is wide enough to hold a grief that would shatter the fragile ceilings below. This is where the true hidden history of the city resides, not in the laws passed in the capital, but in the way a community stitches itself back together after a tear. You witness the strength it takes to keep going, to return to the factory the next morning, to continue rolling cigars or stitching shirts when your heart is hollowed out by loss. It is a terrifying level of resilience. You learn that the survival you have been witnessing is not just about physical endurance, it is an act of spiritual defiance. You look at the children playing near the chimney stacks. oblivious to the precariousness of their own existence. And you feel a protective instinct that defies all logic. You realize that you are all guardians of one another. The roof is not just a place where you escape the heat. It is a place where you hold vigil. It is where you remind one another that you are still here, that you still matter, and that even in the face of an environment that seems designed to erode your humanity, you are still capable of love, of mourning, and of enduring. As the night deepens, you hear the distant melancholic ring of a church bell. It's a sound that marks the passing of another soul, but up here it also marks the persistence of the community. You're all still breathing, you are all still standing, and for tonight that is enough. When you first arrive on the roof, it seems like a chaotic scramble, a landscape of blankets, laundry, and huddled bodies fighting for a patch of cool air. But if you watch closely night after night, you begin to see a pattern emerge. There are no written laws, no police, and no landlords patrolling these heights. Instead, there is a complex web of unspoken contracts that govern every inch of the tarred surface. This is the organic law of the tenements. The space near the water tower, for example, is tacitly reserved for the elderly and the infirm. It is the most sheltered spot, protected from the worst of the evening wind, and far from the noisy, playful roots of the children. No one need to announce this rule. It is simply understood. When a younger man tries to stake out a space there, he is met with a silent, disapproving stare from the matriarchs, and he quickly moves along. It is a hierarchy of respect, born from the shared recognition that those who have survived the longest have earned their place in the shade. Then there are the laundry corridors. You might think the clotheslines are placed randomly, but they follow a strict communal logic. They are strung up in parallel lines, creating narrow alleys that serve as unofficial pathways. This ensures that even when the roof is at its most crowded, there is a way to navigate from the hatch to the parapet without stepping on someone's bedding. If a line sags or snaps, neighbours you've never spoken to will reach out to help tie it back up, not out of charity, but out of a collective necessity to keep the thoroughfares open. Disputes do happen, of course. Two families might clash over a patch of space that someone considers theirs from the night before, but these arguments are rarely explosive. They are conducted in low, intense whispers, constrained by the knowledge that the walls are thin, and the downstairs neighbours are already on edge. There is a rooftop consensus. If you create too much noise, you risk losing the privilege of the roof altogether. The desire for a cool night's sleep acts as a powerful regulator of human behaviour. You learn to negotiate, to trade, and to compromise. You might offer a bit of your floor space for a neighbour's, help with a heavy crate, or share a bit of news from the street for a spot closer to chimney. This isn't just about sharing space. It is about the birth of a functioning micro-society. You are learning that community is not something you are given. It is something you build, one silent agreement at a time. This is how the Lower East Side actually works. Beneath the chaos of the city's industrial roar, there is this quiet, meticulous architecture of human cooperation. By observing these rules, you aren't just surviving the night. You are participating in a grand experiment of coexistence. You see that even in the most desperate of circumstances, human beings will naturally lean toward order, toward mutual aid, and toward the preservation of the group. As you settle into your spot, adhering to these invisible boundaries, you feel a sense of belonging that you haven't felt since you left home. You are no longer just a tenant, you are a citizen of the roof. By the time the city clocks strike 3 in the morning, the rooftop has entered its most vulnerable state. The initial buzz of evening conversation has died away. The teenagers have retreated to their pallets. And the heavy, humid silence of the Lower East Side presses down on the tenements like a physical weight. Most people are lost in the deep, restless slumber of the exhausted, but there are always a few who remain awake. They are the night watchmen of the tenements, not by official appointment, but by a quiet, self-imposed duty. You look around the roof and see them, a man leaning against a chimney, his pipe long gone out, an elder woman clutching her rosary, her eyes fixed on the dark abyss of the street below, a worker who simply cannot force his mind to let go of the day's piece rate calculations. They are the eyes of the building. In a neighbourhood where locks are flimsy and the walls are paper, then their presence is the only real security the tenement has. There is a strange shared camaraderie among these sleepless souls. They don't need to speak. A slow nod of the head as their eyes meet in the dark is enough. They are watching for the things that threaten the delicate equilibrium of the roof, the sudden flare of a stove fire in an apartment window, the prowling shadows in the alleyway, or the quiet, panicked arrival of a new, confused immigrant who doesn't know where to turn. They are the guardians of the collective peace. This watchfulness is an extension of their survival. They know that in a city that sees them as expendable, their only true safety lies in each other. If a fire starts on the second floor, it is the person on the roof who will sound the alarm first. If someone falls ill in the night, it is these watchers who will hear the call for help. It is a primitive, highly effective form of mutual protection that predates any formal city infrastructure. To be one of these watchers is to feel the height of the tenement in its most honest, unadorned state. You become intimately familiar with the rhythm of the city at night, the distant haunting toll of a harbour bell, the sudden, sharp clatter of a late-night cart, the way the wind catches the laundry lines and makes them shiver like ghosts. You are the bridge between the exhaustion of the day and the hope of the morning. You are the barrier between the vulnerability of your neighbours and the indifference of the dark. And as the first faint hint of grey light begins to touch the eastern sky, these watchers are the first to notice. They see the shift before anyone else. The moment the city prepares to endure another day, they are the ones who bear the silent burden of the night so that the others can dream. It is a thankless, exhausting and noble task, one that reinforced the fundamental truth of the Lower East Side. You survive, you watch, you hold on, and you wake up to do it all over again. In the Lower East Side of the 8880s, silence is a luxury that no one can afford. The city is a cacophony of industrial ambition, the incessant metallic screech of the elevated trains that rattle your teeth even from blocks away, the thunderous clatter of iron, rimmed wheels on cobblestones, and the relentless, unintelligible shouting of hawkers selling everything from fish to coal. Down in the belly of the tenement, this noise is a constant, suffocating blanket. It seeps through the cracks of your door, vibrates through the floorboards, and makes it impossible to ever truly find a moment of stillness. But when you climb to the roof, the soundscape changes. It is a vertical migration from the noise of the earth to the silence of the sky. As you ascend, the jagged, chaotic roar of the street begins to soften, muffled by the sheer density of the buildings themselves. By the time you reach the top, the city below sounds like nothing more than a distant oceanic hum, a vast breathing organism that is moving without you. This shift in sound is not just physical, it is a psychological transformation. For those few hours on the roof, the mechanical, demanding roar of New York is replaced by a different kind of sound, the snap of laundry in the wind. The low rhythmic murmur of neighbours speaking in a dozen different tongues, and the distant, lonely whistle of ships on the East River. It is a transition from the noise of production to the sound of humanity. You begin to recognize the city by its sounds. You learn that a certain frantic clattering signifies a fire engine rushing to an emergency. You learn the specific, mournful toll of the church, bells that marks a life lost. You learn the muffled, rhythmic thumping from the floor below that signals a night of work that shouldn't be happening. You are no longer just living in the city, you are listening to it. You are decoding the language of the Industrial Revolution, hearing the friction of progress against the people who are being flattened by it. Yet there is a particular unsettling quality to the rooftop silence when the wind dies down and the city seems to momentarily hold its breath. That silence is profound. It is in these moments that the isolation of the immigrant experience hits you hardest. You are suspended above a city of millions, yet you are completely alone with your own thoughts and the weight of your own history. The silence doesn't offer comfort, it offers a mirror. It forces you to confront the very things you were trying to drown out, with the noise of the factory floor, the grief of what you left behind, the fear of what the winter will bring, and the haunting question of whether this is all there will ever be. You learn that in New York, you must fight to find the noise, and then you must be strong enough to survive the silence that follows. If you look closely at the faces on the rooftop, you see more than just exhaustion. You see the weight of thousands of unwritten letters. In the 1880s, the myth of the Golden New York is a powerful export. Back in the villages of Poland, Italy, or Ireland, your family thinks you are living in a city paved with opportunity. They imagine you walking down wide, sunlit boulevards, earning a fortune and building a new life. They don't know about the air shafts, the piece-rate slavery, or the taste of coal dust in the morning. Many of the people huddled here on the tar paper have stopped writing home entirely. It is not because they have forgotten their families. It is because the truth is too heavy to translate into ink. How do you write a letter home explaining that you spend 14 hours a day in a windowless room, that you sleep on a mattress shared with strangers, and that your only escape is a scorching hot roof above a tenement? To tell the truth would be to break their hearts. It would be an admission of failure in a place where failure is synonymous with starvation. So they write these letters in their heads. As they stare out at the distant, glittering skyline, they compose narratives of triumph. They write about the fine clothes they are wearing, the hearty meals they are eating, and the grand future they are securing for the children back home. These mental letters become a survival mechanism. They allow the individual to project a version of them that is strong, successful, and enduring, even when the reality is thin, ragged, and fading. This silence, this gap between the reality of the immigrant and the perception of the family back home, is a form of exile that is even more painful than the physical one. You are effectively living two lives. One is the life of the labourer, the survivor, the invisible gear in the machine. The other is the life you curate for your loved ones, a carefully constructed fiction that keeps their hope alive. You carry this double existence everywhere you go, but it is heaviest here, on the roof, under the vast, uncaring sky. There is a profound, tragic irony in this. By trying to protect your family from the truth of your struggle, you isolate yours further. You lose the ability to ask for help, to admit defeat, or to share the burden of your grief. You become a solitary guardian of a secret, carrying the weight of a life that is simultaneously heroic and devastatingly hollow. When you hear a neighbour weeping quietly in the corner of the roof, You know exactly what they are mourning. It isn't just the loss of a child or the hunger in their belly. It is the loss of the person they used to be before they had to start lying to the people they love most. The rooftop becomes a theatre of these unspoken truths, a place where, for a few hours, the facade can drop, and the reality of the immigrant, lonely, struggling, and fiercely resilient, is laid bare beneath the stars. The tenement walls are made of brick and mortar, crumbling and soot, stained, but they are not the hardest barriers you face. The true walls of the Lower East Side are built of prejudice, language, and the deep-seated fear of those who arrived earlier. As you walk out of the tenement hatch and in the sunlight of the city, you feel the weight of these invisible boundaries. They are in the way a shopkeeper looks at your clothes, in the way a foreman dismisses your suggestions, and in the way the city's newspapers describe your neighbourhood as a breeding ground for vice and disorder. This is the era of nativist suspicion. There is a prevailing narrative in 880s New York that immigrants are not just labour, they are a threat to the moral and social fabric of the country. You are often treated as a transient being, someone who is here only to drain resources, not to contribute to the nation's growth. You feel this in the way the local police patrol your streets with suspicion rather than protection. You feel it in the way that even when you work twice as hard as anyone else, you are still viewed as an outsider, someone whose foreign accent or unfamiliar customs mark you as fundamentally less than. These barriers dictate your movement. You know which districts of the city you can walk in without feeling the gaze of hostility, and which ones are effectively closed to you. You learn to mute your language in public, to dress in ways that won't attract notice, and to shrink your physical presence so as not to provoke the anger of those who believe you don't belong here. It is a constant, exhausting performance of assimilation. You are being squeezed from two sides, the physical pressure of the tenement and the social pressure of a city that use you for your hands but rejects your heart. Yet this is where the roof becomes the ultimate training ground for your defiance. Because you are constantly told you don't belong, you learn to claim the places where you are allowed to stand. You learn that belonging is not granted by the city, it is forged by the community you create. The rooftop is a space where the prejudice of the street cannot reach. Up here, you are not an immigrant problem. You are a human being. The labels used by the newspapers and the politicians are stripped away by the thin, cool night air. You realize that these invisible walls, these structures of hate and exclusion, are also made of human choices. They are just as fragile as the brick of the tenements. You see the younger generation, those who go to school and learn the language, starting to push back. They are the ones who will eventually dismantle these walls, who will challenge the shopkeepers and demand their place at the table. You are building the foundation for them. You are teaching them that their identity is not defined by the prejudice of others, but by the resilience of their own history. Every time you stand tall, every time you work with dignity, and every time you claim your space in this city, you are chipping away at the walls that try to hold you back. You are not a guest in this country, you are its architect. And the rooftop is where you first learn to look down on the prejudices of the world, knowing that while you may be confined today, your presence is an inevitable part of the future. In the crushing weight of the 8880s tenement life, your identity is under constant siege. The city wants to strip you of your history. It wants to turn your voice into a factory whistle, and your hands into mere tools of production. Yet, as you look around the rooftop at night, you notice that beneath the blankets and the cooking pots, everyone has a talisman. It might be a small, weathered crucifix tucked into waistcoat pocket, a worn-out prayer book in a language that no one else on the roof can read, or simply a specific way of folding a shawl that identifies exactly which valley in the old country you came from. These are not just trinkets, they are acts of resistance. By holding on these symbols, you are declaring that you are not just a labourer. You are a person with a lineage, a culture, and a story that predates the soot-stained bricks of New York. This need to anchor oneself is critical. You see a man spend an hour every evening pulsing a small brass candle holder, the only beautiful thing he owns in this world. You see a woman hum a lullaby that sounds like the wind moving through olive trees, a sound that has no place in the rhythmic metallic clatter of the Lower East Side. These are the anchors that prevent the mind from drifting in the abyss of hopelessness. They are the artifacts of a world that was lost, but which you carry with you to ensure that the version of yourself that arrives in the future is not a hollowed-out shell. The social order on the roof is also shaped by these beliefs. You notice that when someone is suffering, when a fever burns too hot or a piece work quota is missed, the community turns to these shared rituals. A group of neighbours might gather to recite a prayer or share a story of a saint or a folk hero from home. It is a way of saying, we are more than our suffering. This shared faith, whether religious, cultural, or simply the belief in the inherent value of human life, creates a spiritual architecture that is stronger than the building itself. You start to realize that you are not just surviving, you are preserving. You are the custodian of a heritage that the city is trying to overwrite. Every time you consciously perform a ritual from your home, every time you teach a child the meaning behind a tradition, you are ensuring that your culture does not vanish in the churn of the American industrial machine. It is a quiet, steady battle against erasure, standing there with the city lights shimmering like distant embers. You understand that your resilience is fueled by what you refuse to forget. You aren't just here to work, you are here to be a witness, a carrier of a flame that burns in the dark, ensuring that when the history of this city is finally written, it includes the names, the prayers, and the stories of the people who climbed the stairs, reached for the sky, and held on to who they were until their very last breath. As you watch the children playing on the rooftop, you realize they are the most important inhabitants of this building. For you, the tenement is a place of survival, a temporary harbour in a storm. But for them, this is the world. They don't remember the green fields of the old country or the smell of the sea on the Atlantic crossing. They only know the rhythm of the brick, the sharp metallic tang of the air shaft, and the soot that settles on their skin like a permanent shroud. Yet there is a fierce, untamable vitality to them. They have turned the rooftop into their own kingdom. They race between the laundry lines, treating the sagging ropes like ropes on a ship or teat ropes in a circus. They play games that blend the traditions of their parents with the harsh, chaotic vernacular of New York streets. They are the synthesis of two worlds, and they move between them with a fluidity that you can only envy. You see the way their parents look at them, not just with love, but with a crushing sense of responsibility. Every cent saved, every hour worked until the fingers bleed, is aimed at the future of these small soot-stained figures. You hear the mothers whispering instructions in their native tongues, pleading with their children to learn English, to study, to be better than the tenements. It is a collective, unspoken prayer that these children will be the ones to break the cycle, the ones who will finally step out of the shadow of the brick and into the light of a life that isn't defined by piece-rate labour. The education of a tenement child happens in two places, the schoolroom where they learn to be Americans, on the street where they learn to be survivors. On the roof you see the synthesis of both. You see an older boy teaching a younger one how to read a discarded newspaper by the light of a street lamp from below. You see them debating the meaning of the city, using the language of their parents to describe the impossible geography of the skyscrapers. They are not just children, they are the next generation of American labor, intellect, and ambition. The tragedy and the beauty of it lie in the cost. To succeed in this city, these children often have to shed the very parts of them that make them who they are. They have to leave behind the languages, the superstitions, and the specific communal loyalties that kept their parents alive. They become the bridge generation, the ones who endure the agony of living between two identities. You watch them, and you feel a profound sense of awe. They are the true architects of the American dream. The buildings you live in might be slums, but the lives they are building are the pillars of the country's future. As you sit here watching them chase shadows across the tar, you realize that your struggle, your nightly climb to this rooftop, is not just about your own survival. It is about carving out a path so that one day they won't have to look at the sky from a tenement roof. They will be the ones building the skyscrapers, and they will be the ones who, when they look back, will tell the story of the parents who kept the light burning in the dark. There is a specific kind of silence that falls over the rooftop when a family moves on. In the tenement culture, no one ever really leaves without leaving a hollow space behind. When a neighbour, someone who shared their meagre rations, held your hand through a fever, or helped you fix the pulley for your laundry, finally packs their few belongings into a crate and disappears in the morning fog, the rooftop feels smaller. The constellation of familiar faces that kept the loneliest at bay begins to dim. You watch them go, often in the grey light of dawn, heading toward the promise of a place with actual windows, or perhaps even a backyard. For them, it is a triumph, the ultimate proof that the city can be conquered. For you, it is a reminder of the fragility of your own existence. You see the space they used to occupy on the roof, now empty, covered in nothing but the dust of the city. You find yours pacing that empty spot, wondering if that success is contagious, or if it is a departure that leaves you more isolated than before. This is the great paradox of the immigrant experience. You are constantly working to get out, yet everything you value is built on the shared struggle of being in. The exodus of the successful leaves behind a community that is perpetually renewing itself with new arrivals, who don't yet know the unspoken rules of the rooftop. You find yours becoming the elder, the one who has to show the new family how to climb the hatch, which part of the parapet is safe, and how to manage the heat of the air shaft. The cycle never truly stops, it just shifts. There is a bittersweet quality to these departures. You feel a genuine pride for those who have broken free. It validates the idea that this misery is not eternal. But there is also a cold, sharp pang of abandonment. You have survived together, built a life in the margins together, and now they are ascending into reality you can only dream of. The rooftop remains, the tar and brick, but the chemistry of the place changes. The stories told in the cooling air of September are different now, filled with the absence of the voices that used to fill them. You realize that these buildings are essentially temporary vessels. They are the transition points in a much larger migration, a filter through which thousands of souls must pass to become something new. As you look out over the skyline, you understand that you too are waiting for your turn. You are waiting for the moment when you will be the one carrying the crate down the stairs, leaving the suit and the struggle behind. But until that day comes, you continue to hold your place, watching the city swallow those who left and waiting to see who will fill their shoes. The rooftop is a revolving door of hope and loss, and you are the witness to the endless, shifting tides of humanity that flow through these dark, narrow hallways, moving forever toward a horizon that promises something better. Even when you finally descend the tenement stairs for the last time, carrying your meager life in a wooden box, you never truly leave the rooftop behind. You might move to a neighborhood with wider streets, where the air doesn't smell of coal smoke and the rooms have windows that face the sun. You might even find a life where you no longer have to worry about the rent collectors, knock, or the daily battle for a bit of breathable air. But the Tenement imprint is permanent. Years later, sitting in a quiet, spacious room, you will wake up at 3 a.m, your heart hammering against your ribs, because your subconscious still expects to hear the muffled cries of a sick child in the next apartment or the relentless hum of the distant city. You will find that you still cannot stand the sight of a cluttered room, or that you still have a compulsive need to keep your few possessions in perfect, organized order, a vestige of the days when you lived in a space no bigger than a ship's cabin. The discipline you learned in the dark, crowded halls of the Lower East Side becomes the bedrock of your success, yet it is also a quiet, persistent trauma. There is a strange, paradoxical long that develops after you have escaped. You might think you would want to erase the memory of the tenement, to scrub it from your history, as if it were a stain. But you find yourself walking back to the old neighborhood, just to stand on the sidewalk and look up at the roof. You look for the shadows of the people who are still there, still climbing the hatch, still trading secrets in the cooling night air. You see your younger self in them, and you feel an overwhelming, almost painful empathy. You realize that you didn't leave the Lower East Side. The Lower East Side became the framework through which you see everything else. You have learned that home is not a physical structure, but a state of endurance. The people who left behind these buildings have become the city's backbone. They are the shopkeepers, the teachers, the union organizers, and the parents who taught their children that nothing is free and everything must be earned. They have taken the lessons of the rooftop, the cooperation, the vigilance, the ability to find beauty in the shadows, and woven them into the identity of a new, rising middle class. But there is a part of you that remains on that roof forever. It is the part that learned to look at the sky when the world felt like it was caving in. That part of you is forever suspended above the noise, forever catching the first cool breeze of September, and forever holding on the stubborn, defiant belief that survival is just the beginning. You are a testament to the fact that these buildings were not merely cages. They were the crucibles in which a new kind of human spirit was forged. As you look at the tenement one last time, you don't feel anger and you don't feel regret. You feel a heavy, profound sense of belonging to a history that few will ever understand, but that you carry in every breath you take. You have survived the fire, and in doing so, you have become the fire itself. As the 8880s bleed in the 8890s, the city begins to outgrow its own skin. The cobblestones that once felt like the entire world now rattle with the vibration of new, strange machines. You notice the skyline changing, not just in the height of the buildings, but in the flicker of light that doesn't come from a tallow candle or a gas lamp, but from the mysterious humming brilliance of electricity. The city is coming faster, colder. It is leaving the era of the tenement behind, even if the buildings themselves are left standing as rotting, skeletal ghosts of the past. You stand on your rooftop and watch the city's transformation. The skyline is being punctured by steel frames that rise higher than any spire you ever imagined. There is a sense of inevitability to it. The city is marching toward the 20th century, and it is a march that does not account for the fragile, crowded lives in the Lower East Side. The tenement is becoming an obstacle, a remnant of a primitive time that the modern planners want to clear away. This creates a new kind of anxiety. You are no longer just fighting the heat or the disease. You are fighting the irrelevance. The skills that brought you here, the hand stitching, the manual labour, the ability to work in total darkness are becoming less valuable in a world that prize mass production and mechanical efficiency. You see the younger ones, those who have spent their lives running on these rooftops, now looking toward the factories not as temporary prisons, but as permanent stations in life. They are being absorbed in the machinery, losing the individuality that you fought so hard to preserve on the roof. The roof itself feels different now. The air doesn't seem as clean, tainted by the heavy black smoke of coal-fired boilers that now power the larger, more modern factories. The quiet, nightly congregations are fewer. People are too exhausted, too beaten down by the relentless pace of the city's industrial surge to climb the stairs. You feel a creeping sense of solitude. The community that once thrived on these heights is fracturing as the city draws them into different paths. Some to the expanding slums further uptown, some to the new sweatshops, and others, miraculously, in the burgeoning middle class. This is the great turning point of your existence. You realize that the tenement life was not just a chapter in your personal story, but a specific moment in the life of the city. Bridge that spanned the gap between the old agrarian world you left behind and the cold steel, plated future that is rising around you. You look at the bricks beneath your feet, once the foundation of your survival, and you see them beginning to crumble. The mortar is turning to dust. You are witnessing the end of an era, and for the first time, you don't feel like you are waiting for something to happen. You realize that you have already lived through the most important, the most desperate, and the most vital part of the story. You have survived the test of the tenement, and no matter how much the city changes, no matter how high the steel towers rise, that survival remains an unshakable part of the bedrock of New York. The city is a voracious eater of its own history. As the 19th century gasps its final breaths, the wrecking ball begins to make its presence felt. You watch as a neighbouring tenement, a building that held the lives of a dozen families and the dreams of countless children, is reduced to a mound of pulverized red brick and splintered pine. It is a violent act, a sudden erasure, that seems to suggest that all the nights you spent on that roof, all the whispers, the prayers, and the secret pacts of solidarity have been rendered meaningless. But as you stand in the swirling dust of the demolition, you realize something profound. The tenement was never just the brick, it was the resistance of the people who inhabited it. Even as the structures are cleared to make way for wider boulevards and modern transit, the tenement spirit, that gritty, defiant ability to build a life out of the scraps left behind by progress, has already permeated the city's concrete. You see it in the way the local shopkeepers still treat one another with a tacit, respectful code of survival. You see it in the way their neighbourhood's children look at the world with eyes that have seen the struggle of their parents and are now fueled by a harder, more focused ambition. You are witnessing a transition from a physical existence to a cultural ghost. The Lower East Side is no longer just a collection of buildings. It is a repository of experience. Every person who climbed those stairs, every hand that scrubbed the floor until it bled, every heart that broke and healed on those rooftops has left a mark on the collective psyche of New York. You realize that you are not losing your home. You are seeing it graduate into the history of the metropolis. There is a sense of completion in this destruction. The tenement had served its purpose. It was a crucible, and the metal had finally been cast. The people who emerged from these buildings did not just disappear in the city, they became the city. They filled the factories, the offices, the police stations, and the schools. They became the very pulse of the Gilded Age, the hands that built the skyscrapers and the voices that would eventually define the American political landscape. You look down at your own hands, calloused and scarred by years of labour, and you see them as the tools that helped build this foundation. You are no longer the frightened immigrant clutching a suitcase. You are a witness. You are the holder of the narrative. As the sun sets behind the silhouette of a new, towering steel structure, you don't mourn the passing of the tenement. You acknowledge it. You understand that every great city is built on the bones of the stories that came before it, and that your own story, written in the soot of the air shafts and the cool air of the rooftops, is now an indelible, invisible part of the city's heart. The dust settles, the evening bells toll, and you take a deep, steadying breath. The past is fading, but it is not gone. It is simply being woven into the fabric of the future. Years have passed, and the cityscape of New York has become a forest of glass and steel that would have been unimaginable to your younger self. The Lower East Side of 8887 is now a collection of trendy brick facades and upscale cafes, where tourists walk the streets that were once the corridors of your survival. You find yourself walking these same streets not as a resident, but as a traveller visiting a ghost town of the heart. The rooftops are no longer communal islands for the desperate. Some are locked tight, others are transformed into manicured gardens for the wealthy, and many are simply forgotten, hidden beneath the shadows of skyscrapers that dwarf the tenements of old. It is strange to look up and realize that the very places where you learn the meaning of humanity are now inaccessible, preserved only in the architecture of the city's bones. Yet, as you stand on the corner of Orchard and Delancey, you feel a peculiar sense of presence. You look at the young people rushing past, people who don't know the ache of the air shaft or the smell of the coal smoke, and you realize that the energy of the city is the same friction that defined your life, the same drive to reach for something higher, the same desperation to carve out a space of dignity in an indifferent environment. It is all still here, vibrating in the concrete and the asphalt. You are looking at the legacy of the tenement, not in the bricks, but in the unstoppable momentum of the city itself. You have reached a point where the distinction between your own memory and the historical record has blurred. You are no longer just an individual. You are a living archive. Every time you speak, every time you remember, you are rescuing those nights on the roof from the oblivion of time. You realize that your struggle was never meant to be a permanent state, but a necessary labour of birth for the city that followed. The air feels different today, cleaner yet thinner. You take one last look at the sky, the same sky that looked down on you when you were 20, when the future was a terrifying blank page. You know now that the stories aren't just yours, they belong to the city. They belong to the millions who have come since, each carrying their own suitcase, each looking for their own rooftop, each fighting their own quiet, unseen battles. The narrative has expanded beyond you, becoming the very fabric of New York's soul. You are finally completely at peace with the silence. The city is breathing, and you are part of its breath. You turn away from the old street, the weight of the past finally lightened, and you walk forward into a future that you helped build, knowing that even in the tallest tower, the spirit of the tenement rooftop remains, a hidden beating heart, watching over the city, forever waiting for the next generation of dreamers to find their way to the light. It is the small things that remain when the grand narratives of history are stripped away. You find that you don't remember the exact date of a Tenement Reform Act or the specific political debates that raged in the newspapers of 8887. Instead, you remember the way the moonlight caught the worn edge of a wooden bucket, the precise bittersweet scent of drying laundry in a summer breeze, and the feeling of your neighbour's hand on your shoulder, calloused, rough and steady. These are the fragments that constitute the true history of the Lower East Side. We often make the mistake of thinking history is written in ink by men in high offices, but you know better. History is written in the silence of the night, in the quiet exchange of bread, and in the unspoken understanding between two strangers who realize they are in the same boat. It is a record of human persistence carved into the everyday acts of living, suffering, and surviving. As you look back, you realize that the tenement was a sieve. It strained out the superficial, the greedy, and the weak, leaving behind only the distilled essence of what it means to endure. The people who stayed, the ones who kept climbing the stairs, were those who carried within them a quiet, luminous core of dignity. That dignity wasn't given to them. They had to manufacture it themselves, night after night, in the dark, cramped spaces and on the open, exposed rooftops. You see that your life, and the lives of those who shared those rooftops with you, was a testament to the fact that even in the most crushing density, the human spirit is not a static object. It is a flame that dances, changes colour, and grows brighter the more it is threatened by the dark. You are the product of that process. You have been refined by the pressure of the tenement, polished by the struggle, and tempered by the heat of the city. The city is full of these ghosts. They reside in the floorboards of the old buildings, in the narrow alleys that still hold the chill of the past, and in the quiet pride of families who remember the stories their grandparents told about the rooftop days. You are not just a survivor of the 8880s, you are a carrier of a specific kind of light. And as you walk through the city now, you recognize the echoes of your own history in the eyes of everyone you pass. Everyone is climbing a rooftop, everyone is looking for a breeze, and everyone is waiting for their moment of clarity. The history of the tenement is not a closed book. It is a living, breathing pulse that beats underneath the asphalt of every street you walk. The story is not yours alone. It is the story of the city itself, a never-ending ascent toward the light. There is a strange pulsing rhythm that connects the New York of 8887 to the New York of today. You watch the young commuters in the subway, their face illuminated by the blue light of their devices, their hands gripping the metal poles with a strength they don't even realize they possess. You see it in their eyes, filial, sharp-edged resilience. They are the descendants of those who once huddled on the tenement roofs, even if they don't know the names of the streets their great-grandparents walked. The tenement was a laboratory of the human soul. It tested how much a person could endure before they broke, and it discovered that the answer was almost infinite. That resilience wasn't left behind in the rubble of the demolished buildings. It was passed down, encoded in the DNA of their children and their children's children. Is the reason why this city never rests, why it is always reaching, always building, always hungry for the next day. The tenement grit is the secret ingredient in the city's ambition. You understand now that your time on that roof was an investment. Every night you stood against the chimney, every time you held your tongue when you wanted to scream, every bit of dignity you scraped together from the dust, that was a seed you were planting. You were building the foundation of a future that you would never live to see, but that your descendants would inhabit. They are the ones who now look out from penthouses and luxury apartments, and though they have never known the hunger you knew, they carry the same restless drive, the same intolerance for stagnation. History is not a line that stops, it is a spiral that deepens. The people who once occupied the interior rooms, the ones who had to share water and hope, have become the architects of the modern metropolis. They have taken the lessons of the rooftop, the radical cooperation, the ability to find a way when there is no way, and turned them into a city that defies the laws of physics and probability. You are not a ghost of the past, you are the architect of the present. As you walk through the crowded, buzzing heart of the city, you feel a profound sense of continuity. The walls of the old tenements may have crumbled, but the spirit that kept them standing has become the very architecture of the world you inhabit. You feel the weight of the past in your bones, but it no longer presses you down, it anchors you. You are part of a massive unfolding narrative, a saga that began in a dark airshaft and now reaches into the clouds. The roof was the beginning of the journey, but the journey itself is the city, forever rising, forever evolving, and forever holding the memory of those who insisted on living, laughing and dreaming, even when the world told them they had no place to do so. When the tenants finally leave, driven out by the wrecking ball or pulled toward a better life, they leave behind a trail of small, forgotten ghosts. You see them tucked in the floorboards or hidden behind the peeling wallpaper of the now vacant rooms. A single chipped ceramic button from a child's coat, a brittle, yellowed slip of paper with a grocery list written in a language that is quick fading from the neighborhood, or a small, hand-carved wooden bird smoothed by the nervous thumb of someone who sat by the window waiting for work that never came. These objects are the archaeology of survival. They tell a story that no historian can fully capture, because they are not grand and they are not official. They are the everyday artifacts of the Gilded Age. They speak of the immense effort it took to keep a family together, to maintain a shred of decency in an environment that seemed designed to strip it away. Each item is a silent testimony to a moment of decision, a moment of grief, or a fleeting second of play amidst the crushing grind of the tenement. You realize that these rooms are not empty in the way we think. They are saturated with the echoes of these mundane lives. When you step into one of these derelict spaces, the air feels heavy, not with decay, but with the residue of human existence. You are standing in a repository of hopes that were both realized and shattered. The city above you continues to roar, indifferent to the layers of history beneath the sidewalk. But these small fragments hold the memory of the struggle that paved the way for the glass towers of the future. There is a lesson here, one that the modern world often forgets, that your value is not measured by the permanence of what you build, but by the imprint you leave on the lives around you. The people who lived in these rooms may have been forgotten by the history books, their names lost in the census. Records of the 8880s, but they left behind the grit that became the foundation of the modern urban spirit. They were the anonymous labourers who, piece by piece, stitched together the fabric of a new world. As you leave the room and walk back in the bustling street, you carry with you a new perspective. You are not just looking at the architecture of a city, You are looking at the externalized soul of a millions strong movement of people. Every building, every street corner, and every brick retains a vibration of that past. You are walking through a living museum, and though the items may be buried under layers of new concrete and steel, their story continues to pulse in the rhythm of the city's heart. The past is not gone. It is simply waiting to be noticed, hidden in the small, discarded things that tell the truth of who we really are. As the late 8880s progress, the gas lamp and the electric bulb begin to invade the previously unlit corners of the Lower East Side. This is framed as progress, a move towards safety, hygiene, and civilization, but for the inhabitants of the tenements, this sudden surge of light is a double-edged sword. For generations, the darkness of the hallway and the flickering shadow of a candle were the only privacy they had. In the dark, you were invisible to the landlord, the inspector, and the curious eyes of the outside world. When the arc lamps start to hum on the street corners, and the electric wires thread through the walls like veins, the secrecy of survival begins to erode. The authorities argue that more light means less vice, less crime, and better monitoring of the crowded living conditions. They see the darkness as the root of the problem. You know that the darkness was the roof under which you lived your life. You begin to feel exposed. The tenement, once a chaotic shielded labyrinth where one could disappear if they had to, is now being mapped, numbered, and illuminated. This tension is mirrored in the way work is changing. The invention of the electric light bulb allows the sweatshops to extend their hours far into the night. What used to be a natural rhythm governed by the setting sun is now dictated by the relentless, humming flicker of electricity. You no longer have a reason to stop working. The night, which once offered a fragile rest on the rooftop, is now just another shift. The light of progress is, in effect, a new kind of chain that binds you even tighter to the machine. You see the older generation struggle with this. They view the electric light with a mixture of awe and suspicion. It is a cold, piercing light that shows the grime of the tenement in harsh, unforgiving detail. It leaves nowhere to hide, no corner of the room that isn't under scrutiny. Yet you all see the potential in it. For the children, these lights represent a gateway to a world that doesn't shut down when the sun dips below the horizon. They learn to read by the electric glare. They learn the language of the new city in the harsh white glow of the lamp. You find you're standing on the roof, watching the city below start to glow with a uniform, relentless brightness. The jagged skyline is no longer defined by the silhouettes of chimneys against a starlit sky. It is defined by the rigid, buzzing geometry of progress. You are watching the end of the age of shadows. You realize that the city is no longer a place of hiding, but a place of showing, where everything, from the cost of your labor to the state of your living quarters, is brought into the light. This is the transition into the modern world, a place of transpacian scrutiny, where you have to prove your worth not just through your endurance, but through your ability to stand under the harsh, blinding gaze of a society that never sleeps. For years, the discourse on the roof was limited to survival, where to find cheap coal, how to stretch a loaf of bread for another day, or who among the neighbours was finally succumbing to the white plague. But as the 8890s approach, the air itself seems to change, the conversation shifting from the how of endurance to the why of the system. You notice it first in the hushed, intense debates between the younger workers, men and women who have spent enough time in the factories to understand that their labour is the literal fuel for the city's growth. They speak of were once forbidden or too dangerous to utter: union, strike, fair wages. These ideas are smuggled in the tenements like contraband, tucked in the pages of foreign language newspapers, or whispered by organers who navigate the dark stairwells with the caution of spies. For the older generation, this is terrifying. They remember the harsh crackdowns in the countries they fled. They know that asking for too much can lead to ruin, exile, or the blacklisting that ensures you never work again. But for the young, the fear is outweighed by a growing, boiling indignation. The rooftop, once a place of quiet observation, is slow becoming a clandestine meeting ground. You watch as small groups gather behind the parapets, their voices kept low not out of shyness, but out of strategic necessity. They are mapping out the geography of their power. They realize that while they are fragmented by language Italian, Yiddish, German, Polish, they are united by the same grueling hours and the same oppressive peace, rates. The tenement roof becomes a microcosm of a new, emerging class consciousness. This isn't just about money. It's about the fundamental demand to be treated as human beings rather than industrial accessories. You see the power dynamic shift. A foreman who used to walk through the shop floor with absolute impunity now faces a collective, steely silence from the workers, a silence that is far more terrifying than any shout. The tenement, once a symbol of helpless poverty, is transforming into base of operations. You find yourself drawn into these circles, listening to the arguments. You see how the act of organizing breaks the isolation of the immigrant experience. When you share a struggle, you are no longer a lonely stranger in a foreign land. You are part of a force. The transition from the oppressed to the organized is the most dangerous and exhilarating period of your life. You are no longer just waiting for the city to acknowledge your existence. You are beginning to dictate the terms of your contribution. The walls of the tenement, which once felt like a prison, now feel like a fortress. You are witnessing the birth of a social movement that will eventually reshape the landscape of labor in America. The light that you were so afraid of in the previous chapter, the light of transparency, is now being turned against the system itself, illuminating the injustices that were previously hidden in the shadows of the factory floor. In the hierarchy of the tenement, the men often grab the headlines with their loud arguments on the street corners, but the real infrastructure of the revolution was built by the women. It was the women who managed the impossibly thin budgets, who negotiated the price of a loaf of bread, and who ensured that the neighbour's child didn't go hungry when their own parents were out of work. Their power was not performative, it was structural. When you see the neighbourhood finally beginning to organise, it is because the women have bridged the gap between apartments, creating a network of mutual aid that the bosses and the landlord couldn't touch. You watch them as they work, their fingers moving with machine, like precision over the fabric of a garment, their eyes constantly scanning the room, the hallway, and the street. They are the ones who observe the first signs of trouble, who know which tenement building is about to be evicted, and who have the clearest understanding of what it will take to resist. On the roof, while the men might be debating theories, the women are planning the logistics, how to feed a picket line, how to hide a strike worker from the police, and how to keep the morale of the community from collapsing under the strain of a long fight. There is a profound, grueling tension in their lives. They are the first to rise and the last to sleep. They carry the weight of the domestic sphere, the cooking, the cleaning, the care of the children, while simultaneously participating in the grueling labour of the garment trades. Yet, in this exhaustion, you find a unique kind of strength. They have learned to turn their domestic sphere into a site of resistance. The kitchen table becomes a desk for organizing. The laundry line becomes a signal system. The social calls to neighbors become intelligence, gathering missions. The challenge they face is twofold. They are fighting a system that exploits them for their labor, but they are also navigating a patriarchal structure within their own communities that often underestimates them. You see the subtle, powerful ways they challenge this. A mother who quietly instructs her daughter that she is worth more than a piece, rate wage. A group of women who take over a meeting that has stalled in masculine ego and turn it toward practical, collective action. They are the ones who recognize that freedom is not an abstract concept to be debated, but the concrete ability to provide a safe, dignified life for those they love. You start to realize that the tenement spirit you've been observing is, at its core, a feminine creation. It is a spirit of nurturing that has been forced to become a spirit of war. As you stand on the roof, watching the women return from the factory at dusk, their faces etched with lines of profound fatigue, you feel a surge of respect that transcends mere admiration. They are not victims of the industrial machine. They are the people who are learning how to dismantle it from within. They are the ones who hold the community together, and as long as they are the ones holding the threads, the fabric of the neighborhood will not unravel. They are the true anchors of the Lower East Side, and in their hands the future of the American labor movement is being forged one stitch at a time. By the turn of the century, the city's gaze turned toward the Lower East Side with a mix of clinical disdain and predatory ambition. The new tenement house hacks are passed under the guise of public health, aimed at eradicating the filth and immorality of the overcrowded slums. But to you and your neighbors, these laws feel less like a public service and more like an eviction notice. You see the arrival of city inspectors with their clipboards and stern faces, marking buildings as unfit for habitation. They don't see homes, they see statistical liabilities. The rooftops, once your sanctuary, are now cited as fire hazards and overcrowded spaces. You watch the community go a state of quiet, simmering panic. For many, this is the end of the line. Where do you go when the place that accepted you, the only place you could afford, is declared illegal? This is the birth of the modern struggle for housing rights. You witness a shift in the neighborhood's mood. The communal cooperation that once focused on survival is now redirected toward resistance. Meetings are held in the dark of the basement, with people speaking in hushed, urgent tones about refusing to leave. You see the community organize tenant committees. They start gathering signatures, protesting at the local municipal offices, and even physically barring inspectors from entering their buildings. It is a desperate David, Goliath battle. You learn the power of the picket line, the necessity of having a lawyer who speaks the language of the authorities, and the terrifying reality of what happens when the police are sent to enforce an eviction. The architecture of these tenements, the deep, narrow air shafts and the dark, labyrinthine hallways, becomes your battlefield. You know every loose floorboard, every hidden egress, every secret connection between buildings that allows you to slip away or gather in force. The tenement is no longer just a place to live, it is a defensive structure. You realize that the city's plan to state the area is also a plan to scatter the population, to break the communal bonds that make the Lower East Side a unified force. This conflict is the final stage of your education. You understand that the laws of the land are not static. They are tools wielded by the powerful to reshape the world in their image. If you do not participate in the shaping of these laws, you will inevitably be shaped by them. As you stand on the roof, Watching the city's wrecking crews begin their work on the next block over, you feel a deep, burning clarity. You are not just fighting for a roof over your head, you are fighting for the right to belong in the city you helped build. The fight against the sanitation of your neighborhood is the first time you feel truly integrated in the American political experience. You are no longer just an immigrant worker, you are a citizen activist, asserting your claim to space, to dignity, and to the future of the city. The resistance you and your neighbours mounted in the previous years did more than just delay the wrecking balls, it forced the city's hand. For the first time, the housing problem was no longer just a matter of police regulation or sanitation. It became a matter of social responsibility. You begin to see the rise of the model tenements, buildings constructed with the explicit intent of providing light, air, and space to the working class. Walking into these new buildings feels like stepping into another reality. Instead of the suffocating air shafts that trap soot and disease, these structures are designed with wide open courtyards. There is real plumbing, actual running water, and windows that don't look into someone else's kitchen but open out to the sky. It is a stark, almost disorienting contrast to the dark, labyrinthine tenements of your youth. The city is finally acknowledging that the environment in which a person lives directly determines the quality of the society they help create. However, this progress brings its own set of challenges. These model tenements come with stricter rules. There are inspections for cleanliness, mandates on the number of occupants per room, and a kind of surveillance that didn't exist in the chaotic anonymity of the old slums. You feel a strange melancholy watching your neighbours adapt to these rules. The freedom of the old ways, where you could stretch a thin mattress across the floor for a friend in need, is being replaced by the rigid, regulated order of institutional housing. You are trading the harsh independence of the ghetto for the controlled security of the project. You realize that this is the price of integration. To be recognized by the city as a legitimate resident, you must conform to their definition of what a home should be. The visceral, messy, and deeply human bonds that were forged in the darkness of the old tenements are now being standardized. You miss the rooftop with its informal, unspoken laws and its panoramic view of a city that was yours to conquer. These new buildings are safer, yes, and healthier, absolutely, but they are also designed to prevent the kind of communal, underground organizing that defined your early years. As you stand in the courtyard of one of these new buildings, looking up at the sky, you notice the difference. The sky is still the same, vast and uncaring, but the frame through which you see it has changed. You are no longer on the edge of the city, scraping for space in the shadows. You are a planned part of the urban landscape. You have survived the battle for housing, and you have won a seat at the table. But as you look around at the clean white, washed walls of your new home, you can't help but feel that a part of you remains on that old, soot-stained roof, watching the sun rise over a city that you helped build but can no longer quite recognize. The silence of your later years is different from the silence of the tenement. It is no longer the silence of exclusion or the quiet of the night. It is the silence of accomplishment. You sit in your small, stable apartment, the walls no longer feeling like a prison, but a container of memories. You have watched the skyline grow, the iron and brick give way to steel and glass, and you have seen the children of the Lower East Side become the doctors, the writers, and the leaders of this new, sprawling century. You realize that your struggle was not a tragedy to be mourned, but the heavy lifting of a foundation that had to be laid. Every back that bent, every hand that bled, and every spirit that refused to break served a purpose. You are the bridge. You carried the weight of the old world on your shoulders, so that your children wouldn't have to feel the crushing pressure of the path you walked. The city you fought so hard, so against is the city that now defines your own identity. You are no longer the immigrant, the foreigner, or the outcast. You are a part of the city's story. Your story is the city's story. The tenement may be gone, replaced by newer, safer, more efficient ways of living, but the resilience you cultivate it on, that soot-stained roof is the pulse that beats under every street, every subway line, and every skyscraper in New York. You feel a profound, quiet pride. You didn't just survive. You triumphed in the most literal human sense. You created a life where there was none, and you handed that life to the next generation. They may not know the names of the alleys you walked, or the exact terror of the fire escape climb, but they live in the reality you built. That is the true victory. The history of the tenement is not a story of the past, it is the story of the start. Casting a long amber glow across the city, you look at your hands, scarred, aged and steady. They have done their work. The city is alive, roaring and eternal, and in that roar, you hear the echoes of all the voices that climbed the stairs with you all those years ago. You are ready to rest, for you know that the flame you carried through the dark has been passed on, and it will burn for a long, long time. We tend to look at buildings as if they were the final authority on a human life. We think that if the tenement is torn down, the history of those who live there vanishes with the rubble. But as you stand on the precipice of time, looking back over the decades, you realize the truth is quite the opposite. The building was merely a cocoon. The real story, the labor, the communal trust, the fierce ambition, was never made of brick and mortar. It was made of the human spirit in its most concentrated, desperate, and beautiful form. You see the city today, with its towering spires of glass and its frantic pace, and you recognize that the skyscraper is simply the vertical evolution of the tenement. The struggle is the same, even if the tools have changed. Whether you were fighting for a bucket of water in 8887, or fighting for a foothold in the corporate ladder of 22.6, the essential drive remains the hype of New York. The city is at its core a giant, ever-turning engine of human aspiration. This is the great lesson of the rooftop, that the environment does not define the human defines the environment. You and your neighbours took a space that was designed to be a warehouse for bodies and turned it into a sanctuary for the soul. You proved that dignity is not a luxury, but a fundamental choice made in the dark. That spirit has been woven into the city's DNA. Every person who arrives today with their own suitcase and their own fears is walking in the footsteps of those who first climbed the wooden stairs of the Lower East Side. They are the new carriers of the flame. You feel a profound sense of closure, the long climb, the stifling heat, the cold winters, the fight for the light. It all served a purpose. It built the character of a city that would eventually become the lighthouse of the modern world. You are not a ghost haunting these streets. You are the architect of its present. You have played your part in the long, unfolding saga of human existence, and now the city itself carries your story in its vibration, its noise, and its unstoppable drive toward the future. As you look up one last time, the sky above the city seems deeper, more infinite than it did when you were 20. You aren't afraid of the heights anymore, because you know what it took to get here. You have learned that the struggle was the point, that the climb was the purpose, and that the light you were reaching for was not out there in the distance. It was inside you, burning bright and steady all along. There comes a moment when the last of the physical evidence of your youth appears. A wrecking crew clears the final tenement block on your old street to make room for a new community park, a patch of green where there were once only shadow-filled air shafts. It is a strange, jarring experience to walk down the street and find nothing but open space where your rooftop, your hallways, and your neighbours' windows used to be. Yet in that emptiness you find a new kind of clarity the city has finally exhaled. For decades, those buildings held the tension of thousands of lives, the stifling pressure of survival, and the frantic energy of the immigrant struggle. Now that tension is released. The park is a quiet, neutral space, indifferent to the history that lies beneath the soil, but to you it is not empty. You walk the paths, and you see the ghosts of the stairwells, you smell the phantom scent of boiling cabbage and coal smoke. You hear the echoes of lullabies sung in languages that have long since faded from the neighbourhood. This is the final transformation. The history of the tenement has shifted from physical reality to cultural memory. You realise that you were never fighting to preserve the buildings thems. You were fighting to preserve the dignity of the shrinspired within them, that transpired within them. And that, you see, is something that cannot be demolished. It has been absorbed by the city itself. The way the park is used, the way the neighbourhood gathers, the way the next generation speaks about the old days, all of it is a vessel for the story you lived. You are the last witness, the final carrier of the oral tradition. You have seen the transition from the dark, brutal necessity of the 8880s to the open, air-filled promise of the two-fist century. You have learned that the struggle to survive is not a burden to be carried forever. It is a foundation to be stood upon. You watch the children playing in the park, unaware of the ghost beneath their feet, and you feel no sorrow. You feel a deep, quiet peace. They are the fruit of your labour. The cycle is complete. The tenement is gone. The soot has been washed away by time, and all that remains is the strength that you built in the dark, now standing in the light, ready to face whatever tomorrow brings. You stand now at the window of a high-rise office, looking down at the city. From this height, the streets you once walked as a young, anxious immigrant look like thin, intricate threads in a vast, complex weaving. You realize that you have moved through the city in every sense, geographically, socially, and spiritually. The struggle that once threatened to crush you has instead been the very force that lifted you to this vantage point. You see the city not as a collection of buildings, but as a map of human endeavour. You recognize the places where the sweat was shed, where the prayers were whispered, and where the first steps of modern labour movements were taken. The city is a living, breathing history book, and you are one of its most important, albeit anonymous, chapters. You understand now that the tenement life was the apprenticeship of the soul. It taught you that you are capable of surviving the impossible, of finding beauty in the most confined spaces, and of creating light when the world seems determined to stay in the dark. This wisdom is your true inheritance. It is not something that can be taken away by the wrecking ball or lost in the churn of modernization. It is the capacity to endure, to adapt, and to build something meaningful out of whatever scraps you are given. You see this capacity everywhere you look, in the tireless energy of the city's workers, in the ambition of the young people, striving for their own place in the world, and in the resilience of the communities that continue to rise despite the odds. You feel a profound sense of lightness. The worries that used to keep you awake in the cramped, airless rooms of the Lower East Side, the rent, the hunger, the uncertainty of tomorrow, have been replaced by a deep, unwavering confidence. You know that no matter what changes, no matter how high the towers the world moves, the human spirit that forged this city will always endure. It is the bedrock. It is the constant. As you turn away from the window, you know that your journey has come full circle. You started as a stranger in a dark hallway, searching for a place to stand. You end as an architect of the world you now inhabit, deeply rooted in the history of the streets below. You have lived the story, you have learned the lessons, and you have carried the light. The city moved forward fueled by the same fire that once burned on a tenement rooftop, and you are, at last, a silent, satisfied witness to its eternal, beautiful ascent. There is a specific heavy silence that settles into a tenement when the sun hits the zenith, that blinding, oppressive hour when the air shaft becomes a furnace and the light struggles to reach the bottom floors. In those moments, if you sat perfectly still, you could hear the tenement breathing. It was a complex, discordant symphony of human existence, the rhythmic whack of a needle hitting leather in a sweatshop, the shrill, desperate cry of a baby, whose fever would not break, the low, guttural murmur of men debating the price of labour, and the soft, almost imperceptible rustle of someone praying in a corner. You were not merely living in these buildings. You were an organ in a larger collective body. Your hype synchronized with the groaning of the floorboards under the weight of too many lives. Your dreams were polluted by the smells of the neighbours' cooking and the damp rot of the walls. It was an existence stripped of all pretense. There was no room for vanity, no space for secrets. When you were hungry, the wall felt thin enough to share the echo of your stomach with the next room. When you were joyous, the laughter travelled through the ventilation shafts like a rare, precious song. This intimacy was both a curse and the ultimate fortification of the spirit. You learned things about your fellow man that history books would never deem important enough to record. You knew exactly which neighbour would share their last pinch of tea. You knew which father would come home drunk and lash out at the silence. And you knew how to brace yours for that storm. You learned the nuance of human frail and the limitless, terrifying depth of human endurance. It was an education in the raw, unpolished reality of being alive. And yet, as you sit in the quiet of this new modern world, where the walls are thick, soundproofed and cold, you find yours mourning that loss of connection. You realize that in our drive for comfort, for private space, for the sanitization of our lives, we have inadvertently severed the very threads that once bound us into a community. We have gained privacy, but we have lost the collective weight of the struggle. You remember the nights on the rooftop, where the barrier between you and them dissolved in the starlit canopy above. You were a mosaic of 1,000 different origins, German, Irish, Jewish, Italian, but you were fused into single defiant entity by the sheer necessity of surviving the tenement. You look at your hands again, the hands that once scrubbed the communal floor and held the heavy iron of the garment trade. They are softer now, the scars have faded in the translute skin of age, but the phantom memory of the work remains. You realize that your life was never about the pursuit of luxury. It was about the act of bearing witness. You were the scribe of the tenement. You kept the ledger of every soul that passed through those narrow hallways. You held the names of those who arrived with nothing and left behind only the echo of their footsteps. As you look out at the cityscape with its cold, gleaming towers, you don't see progress in the way others do. You see a layered tomb. You see the ghosts of 1,000 tenement roofs standing as invisible supports beneath the steel foundations of the skyscrapers. Every modern miracle of this city is built upon the silent, steady shoulders of those who came before. You are the final custodian of this truth. You are the link between the dark, soot-filled basements of the 8880s and the soaring, glass-fronted ambitions of today. You have not just lived through a change of eras. You have become the bridge itself, weathering the storm of time, so that the story would not vanish into the smoke of the past. The tenement is dead, but the spirit, that stubborn, unyielding fire, still smoulders, waiting for the wind to catch it again. It is a strange, quiet irony that as the years advance, the very things that the city once desperately wanted to forget, the squalor, the overcrowding, the desperate, hungry faces of the Lower East Side, are now the things it seeks to remember. You find yours walking into the Tenement Museum, a place that occupies one of those old buildings you once thought would be ground to dust. They have frozen a single moment in time, stripped away the modern plumbing and the electricity, and turned it into an exhibit. You stand in the centre of the room, looking at the familiar, peeling wallpaper and the rusted iron stove. It feels like a theatre stage where you once played a lead role, but now you are a spectre. Tourists move through the rooms, their voices hushed, their eyes wide with a mixture of pity and fascination. They touch the artifacts, a heavy dented iron kettle, a worn pair of boots, with a reverence that seems almost sacred. You want to tell them that these objects were not artifacts, they were tools. That kettle boiled the meagre broth that kept a family alive through a bitter winter. Those boots walked 1,000 miles of city pavement to find day labour that rarely paid enough to cover the rent. But you stay silent. You realise that your presence here, as an old person reflecting on these walls, is the only piece of the exhibit that isn't preserved. You are the living record, and with you, the visceral, raw truth of this life will eventually fade. Yet, there is a strange comfort in this process of museum making. The city is finally acknowledging that the tenement was not a mistake. It was the crucible of the American dream. By turning these spaces into a record, the city is effectively saying that the struggle of the immigrant was not in vain, that it was in fact the bedrock upon which all this glass and steel were raised. You reflect on the evolution of this preservation. The city has stopped trying to outrun its past and has started to embrace it. There is a newfound respect for the lower classes, for the labourers, and for the sheer stubborn will of those who refused to disappear. You see the descendants of the tenement dwellers, the children of your own children, coming to these places, tracing the genealogy of their own families, searching for the names of ancestors who arrived with nothing but a suitcase and a name. They aren't looking for luxury, they are looking for their identity. You have come to understand that history is not a collection of dates and wars. It is the sum of these small, intimate, and often painful stories. When you finally step out of the museum and back on the street, you see the city differently. The skyscrapers are no longer just symbols of power. They are the result of the labour you started. The parks are the result of the housing battles you fought. The modern, diverse and vibrant New York you see around you is the direct descent of the messy, multilingual and struggling community you once called home. You have done your part. You have transitioned from being a ghost of the past to being a part of the city's living, breathing, and enduring conscience. The cycle of the tenement, from chaos to order, from survival to legacy, is finally complete. The final dissolution is not a sudden rupture, but a slow, peaceful process, like a drop of ink falling into vast, swirling glass of water. For a lifetime you have guarded your memories as if they were fragile, precious glass, terrified that if they shattered, you would lose the proof that you ever existed. But as you stand on the street where the last remnants of your old life have long since been paved over, you realize that your memories were never yours to own. They belong to the city. Every time a tourist pauses to look at a plaque, every time a student reads a book about the Gilded Age, every time a new immigrant walks into an old neighborhood looking for a start, your story is being told, even if your name is forgotten. The tenement, the rooftops, the air shafts, the bitter winters, they are no longer specific, localized points in time. They have become part of the city's folklore. You are part of the great humming machine that you once feared. You have ceased to be the survivor of a difficult era and have become the story itself. You look at the passers-by. They are living the lives you helped pave the way for. They move with a freedom you never knew, a confidence in their right to occupy this space that you spent your entire life struggling to secure. And that is fine. That is the point. You realize that you have moved through the city like a quiet, invisible tide, eroding the sharp edges of history and leaving behind a smooth, polished path for those who follow. The boundaries between your past and the present have completely dissolved. You are no longer standing in the shadow of the tenement. You are the light that illuminates the progress that came after. The exhaustion has finally lifted, replaced by a profound, hollow and beautiful sense of completion. You are, at last, just a hype in the collective chest of the city. You find you're standing on a bridge as the sun dips below the horizon, painting the steel skeletons of the skyscrapers in shades of bruised purple and liquid gold. From here, the city looks less like a chaotic metropolis and more like a vast breathing organism. You realize now that the buildings are not just architecture. They are monuments to the human will to climb, to stand upright, to reach for a sky that has always been indifferent to us. Every beam of steel, every rivet, holding the massive structures together, feels like a silent salute to the calloused hands that laid the first foundations. You are not just looking at a city, you are looking at a collective achievement of millions of spirits that refused to be silenced by poverty or history. You understand now why you spent so many years on that roof. You were never just observing the city. You were acting as its height, keeping the rhythm until the next generation could take over. The fear of being forgotten, that gnawing, persistent ache you carried through your middle years, is gone. You realize that you can't be forgotten because you are not a separate entity from what you helped build. You are the structural integrity of the city. When the wind whistles through the canyons of Manhattan, it carries the echo of the voices that once whispered on your rooftop. When the subway tunnels rumble beneath the concrete, it is the vibration of the millions who once crowded in the tenements, still moving, still working, still pushing forward. You close your eyes and you are everywhere at once. In the cramped, dark kitchens where mothers once comforted their hungry children, in the bustling garment shops where needles clicked in a frantic race against time, and on the open, windswept roofs where young dreamers once stared at the horizon and promised them that they would never, ever surrender. You are not fading away. You are expanding. You are becoming the very atmosphere of New York. And for the first time you feel a profound, overwhelming peace, not because your struggle is over, but because you finally understand that it was never a struggle at all. It was an act of creation. You have successfully breathed yours into the soul of the city, and in doing so, you have achieved the only kind of immortality that truly matters. You have become the foundation upon which the future will always stand. The night is coming to an end, and for the first time in an eternity, the city is quiet. You are sitting where you began, not on the rooftop of that old tenement, but on the terrace of a building that scrapes the clouds. The air is crisp, thinning as it rises, and the sprawling, glittering expanse of New York stretches out beneath you like a galley of trapped starlight. You look at your reflection in the glass. You see the lines on your face, the map of 1,000 struggles, but you all see eyes that have finally found the light they were searching for. You are no longer the frightened immigrant, nor the weary labourer, nor the ageing witness. You are the city itself. You are the sound of the subway train in the distance, the hum of the electricity in the wires, the silence between there, heartbeats of millions, and the persistent, unshakable drive of every person who arrived here with nothing but a dream. The tenement is gone, the soot is washed away, and the streets you once walked have been renamed and redesigned, but the spirit remains unchanged. It is in the way the city wakes up, with that same ferocious hunger to be better, to be higher, to be more. You realize that you were never just a resident of New York. You were one of its primary builders. The bricks you laid, the sweat you poured into foundations, the hope you nurtured in the dark, all of it is what makes this city impossible to break. As the first light of dawn begins to bleed across the Atlantic, turning the steel skyline into silhouettes of gold and bronze, you take one final, deep breath. You are letting go of the narrative, not because it is finished, but because it has grown too large for words to contain. You are passing the torch, even if there is no one standing next to you. The city will take it, the streets will remember. The wind will whisper the stories you carried for so long, and they will be folded in the life of every person who walks this concrete labyrinth hereafter. You smile, not with your lips, but with the quiet, settled conviction of a soul that has finished its climb. The sun breaks the horizon, flooding the world with an intense, unforgiving, and beautiful light. You are no longer looking for the light, you are the light. And as the city roars to life beneath you, full of noise and chaos and infinite, heartbreaking potential, you step back in the flow of time. The story is over, yet it happening everywhere at every second, in every corner of this magnificent, impossible home. The tenements are memories, you are the foundation, and the city is forever rising. Sleepy History with Benedict is created for relaxation, entertainment, and sleep purposes. The stories shared on this channel are inspired by historical events, daily life, and real periods in history, but they may be simplified, adapted, or narrated in a calming way to enhance the listening experience. This content is not intended to be a precise academic or educational source. While we aim to stay generally accurate, some details may be altered for storytelling flow and relaxation. Please do not rely on this channel as a primary source for historical research or study. By listening, you acknowledge that this content is designed to help you unwind, relax, and fall asleep. Thank you for your understanding and support.